Here. Sorry I'm late. I am kind of late. Oh, somebody already commented a bit. Okay. So, a lot of you probably are going to say, why are you looking at certain things and covering certain things? Or rather, uncovering certain things. Isn't that weird, our language, the way we use it? And yes, most of us have been through the whole English is a spell and words are spells thing. That's kind of why I'm doing this, is to take the superstition out of things we might not understand. I'm not saying that they're good things or that you should do things or endorsing things. We are looking into it to take the superstition, i.e. fear, out of a thing. As someone who is Christ-centered, and you might not be, and that's fine if that's, what you choose with your free will. For myself, putting someone else at the center and seeing that, I am so loved that God came down here to show me how to walk this out, is humbling, and that's a good thing. The problem arises when I think we put ourselves, like we have a grandeur of delusion, maybe like Han Solo said in Star Wars, delusions of grandeur, right? Like I was talking about Sherry Schreiner's book a little bit. It's just very base, when you are only focused on yourself and you think that all these things are great because of you, and you get into a prideful state. That's the only real difference. And I think people need to really look at this. And this is why I say, when you read a story, visualize it in your mind. See what's happening, because there is more being said in between the lines, in between the verses, and what's not being said, and what's being shown to you in the picture of what's happening in that culture and time. And so it's a perfect month, perfect time of year to maybe look at these things and look at America itself and notice and recognize and say, wow, we have all these little superstitious things that we do, that we have kind of plucked from all over the place because we are a melting pot. People don't talk about that part of, like, the Soros agenda is with moving and dividing cultures and separating people from their centerpieces, what's their cornerstones in life, what's most important to them. And your culture becomes a part of who you are. And so I want to maybe take the superstition out of things and show people that these are two sides pretty much of the same coin, and intention does matter. What we call the gifts of the Holy Spirit, other people who are paganistic might call forces of the elements, right? Which I do believe in. I believe the elements have a force. They have an energy behind them, a frequency. But all of these things stem from a singular source. And when you get carried away thinking you have some power within you and not recognizing that you're borrowing it from nature, things God put in a certain order, and you become malicious or nefarious or deceptive or deceitful, you can fall into all kind of things, idolatry and, hey, Samir, nice to see you. Idolatry and all these other things, right? And so I want to show you how these are two sides of the same coin, maybe. And I probably should have put this in the title, but in the Bible, it talks all the time about staffs, right? Moses had a staff, and it is said he raised his staff to the sky, and the Red Seas parted. Now, some people attribute that energy or power, that force that separated the waters, was Moses's wand, right? Or not wand, Moses, excuse me. See how easy it is to slip into that vernacular. Moses's staff. And so, again, when I showed you the similarities between Moses and Gandalf, a lot of us have the same basic views and are looking at the same story and are telling the same story throughout history, just through different cultural eyes. And what is a wand to one person is a staff to another. And I want to show you how much we have in common, and maybe that in the beginning we did stem from a singular faith as well. That this is why you're seeing this kind of borrowing of objects and whatnot. But it's also the counterfeit kingdom. You have to understand that as well. When you fall into pride, which can happen if you become narcissistic, which can happen if you're isolated and secluded, like some of the saints, like some TIs today, like myself. I tried to highlight that just a little bit with the Sherry Shriner thing, and we can look at that book and dissect that story if you'd like. But when we believe that we are, and see, there's a difference. We are the main characters of our own stories, right? We do have that free will, that control, and God loves each and every one of us, and we each have our own journey to take and to walk out. But when we are not recognizing that there is a God who placed us here to do that, we fall into this out of order. We are out of order and we are in error, and your thoughts and your actions and your words and your ideologies and your theologies can all become crooked, right? And out of whack, out of alignment. And this is why it's so important to have your head, heart, soul, mind, spirit, body operating of the same alignment, speaking things that you also act out and not contradicting yourself, which is so difficult for all of us to do today. But anyways, I thought this would be neat to look into how much these two elements have in common, and let's kind of look at where they came from and where they originated. This is actually, I think, a beautiful painting. You could look at it and say this is a woman making her family dinner or brewing up a large batch of tea for a larger group of women. And I think that is beautiful, of course, because I am a woman. I have a different outlook on this. Some people will say she's a pagan, she's a harlot, she's this, that, the other. Again, it's all about perspective. We cannot look at everything and try to find the devil behind every bush, because we'll find it. We'll find that evil that we're looking at, and we will be looking at that evil in the mirror. We will become the darkness that we are perceiving the world from, those darkened eyes. So, wand. What does Wikipedia have to say about this? A wand is a thin, lightweight rod that is held with one hand and is traditionally made of wood. Now, most of us know Hollywood. We know that is a ha-ha terminology for a type of magic wand, okay? Most of us have been down that rabbit hole. We are aware of that. Something else, though, that caught my eye, and this is what I want to talk about. In the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas, there are alleged stories about Christ when he is younger and in his youth, and when he does certain things, and the adults around him think he is evil and attribute this to being evil acts and whatnot. And I won't disagree or agree. I'm just telling you, in summation, giving you the cliff notes of this gospel. Now, if you perceive it through one set of eyes, you could look at it as, yeah, he is being a naughty little boy, and he is using some type of magic and getting it from somewhere. And if he is doing wicked things, well, it must be coming from a wicked source. Another set of eyes will show you that he is not the same as us. He does not have the same mind as us, and that is the divine part in him that we don't quite understand. It is my perspective at this current time, with the knowledge base that I have, and with the research I've done, but also with personal experience and touching base with my spirit to God's spirit. I think that we perceive God the wrong way. And even Christ, if you look at that story of him in the temple, right? He's walking around the temple and everybody thinks it's money that he's mad about. But what does the money represent? They are trading animals. Grand Rising, much love. Much love to you as well. Grand Rising, I like that. Obviously, instead of good, morning is spelled different. So let's not be superstitious. It is spelled different, so it's a different word. But it does sound the same. And you have to wonder why all these different words are given. And it's because throughout history and times like today, when they want to rewrite history as it is happening in live time, the first thing you have to do is change the vocabulary and what words mean. That way, when the story is retold, it is only understood from a certain perspective. That's what I'm talking about with the Gospel of Thomas as well. And how that relates, like if you look at Christ in the temple and him getting angry, it's not the money, it's what the shekels, what they represent. They are buying animals to sacrifice for their sins. And he has told us many times over, God, the creator of love and life and light, prefers obedience over sacrifice. And people say, oh, obedience, that's like such a wicked word. But what does that really mean? It means not transgressing against natural law. Don't go against the will of another or the natural law, which is above the will of another. Don't go against natural order, or strange things will start to happen. And we are seeing that play out in our society because everyone and everything is out of order. I think a lot of it is related to one thing. I'm just going to make a quick reference here. If you look up mad cow disease, I think that's pretty close to, I think people have too much red meat in their diets, and it is showing. And also, the other thing is going against nature, transgressing against nature, and changing your body from what it is. Even spirit has a gender, quote unquote. That is my belief. But how do we bridge this gap, when there are these differences and there are these differences of opinion? Well, again, you have to have a common moral compass, right? And that's what we used to have with the Bible. You even swear in the Bible in court. We have a court system based upon what we believe to be the counsel of God that is above. All of these things are rooted in a history that we barely touch on and we don't even know is there. And so I want people to look at things maybe from a different perspective and say, okay, a magic wand is actually the same thing as Noah's staff, right? And Gandalf, if you change his name to Moses, in image, he looks the same, right? Much like I tell you, and this is how I try to, I don't want to say teach people because I don't want to be a teacher, but this is how I try to teach people the lessons that I have learned, maybe so you can avoid the pitfalls that I've fallen into. So let's look at wand. Let's take the superstition out of it. But at the same time, let's also look at all the things we do today related to what is the magic wand actually? What is the staff actually? Well, it's an extension of an arm or a hand, right? Or a finger. If you look at Gandalf or Moses pointing their staffs in the air, or even Arthur with Excalibur pointing it in the air, or He-Man when he rose his sword in the air. All of these things, a sword, a rod, a staff, a wand, they are all extensions of the arm, of the finger. Anyone who plays a sport understands that the racket is the extension of the arm, the glove is the extension of the hand and the arm, the bat even. So all of these things are representative or symbolic of a hand or a finger. And that's why I titled this what I did. All throughout our childhoods, we've been told, don't point, it's rude to point. Well, is it rude? Is it impolite? Or does that come from a deeper seated superstition that maybe our parents were raised with and their parents were raised with and their parents? actually knew that or held the reason for. Like they knew why we were superstitious of such things, right? Or the superstition was born of a certain time or era. Okay, so you get the point. They're basically the same things, and they're all an extension of the hand or the finger. Now, in the Gospel of Thomas, I don't want to get that out right now and go through the whole cross-referencing. We can sometime if you'd like. Again, just comment that you'd like to. But basically, it goes about to tell how Christ is a naughty little boy, and he's mischievous, and he's doing these magic things that the adults are getting angry and upset, and he's disrupting society, basically, his community over with doing these things. Now, I'm not going to debate whether this book is true or not. I think there's almost always a lesson to be learned from most stories that people share. That's why they share them. If someone has a story to share, they're sharing it to bless you in a way. Or maybe to curse you in other ways if you don't grasp what is being told to you or conveyed to you, right? And we know that with scripture, with ancient texts trying to dissect certain things, and even now with today's documents and the way they're changing the vocabulary, it could be hard to keep up, right? We all know this, and it's stressful too. But did our parents, did they raise us this way? And we've wondered this. Have we been inhibited? Do we not know what we really are? Christ told us, don't ye know that ye are gods? Ye shall judge the very angels. Little g gods, I would say. But we shall judge the very angels because we have authority here. We have, the earth, Eden, the gardens are our domain. And God told us to tame them and to that certain things, that there's a certain order to things. And again, we crush the heads of the serpents and the demons, right? And Mary was the first one to crush the head of the serpent. That's what that verse is about. Many people don't get it. There shall be enmity between him and the woman forever because of this. And it's basically aimed at Mary, but that is taken out on the feminine, and that is very obvious in this realm. There's real hatred towards anything that is divinely feminine or accepted to be as some divine aspect of God that could be possibly feminine. That is sacrilegious to say such a thing, and women have been burned before for that. So I actually do have a lot to say on these topics, especially regarding superstition, that a lot of times if you look at a thing, they look the same. We have the men in black who look like the missionaries who come to our door, who also look like not just the men in black, but what are they? Well, I guess they're the men in black today in the urban legends too as well, with the UFOs. So you have all these people who dress the same and look the same. So you have to ask yourself, they're wearing the same costumes. Are they in some way the same? How is a rod and a wand and a staff, how are they the same? In modern times, wands are usually associated with stage magic or supernatural magic. There have been other uses, all stemming from the original meaning as a synonym of rod and verg. Now understand that a lot of these things are rooted in Norse mythology. If you get to the root of things, just like I said yesterday, the rabbit holes are often leading to all the same places. You have a lot of the same groups of beings or people or cultures that kind of dominated things, right? And Norse mythology is everywhere. We get a lot from that, and Norse Vikings, in my opinion, are another group of the Titans. They are men of renown, and they are warriors, and their women were very strong women as well. And so I think there's something to be learned from them, obviously, and a kind of respect to be had as well, because, again, we might not be able to see it today, but back in the day, we were very different from the men of renown and, quote-unquote giants. So it's hard to envision sometimes, these things happening and living these daily lives like this, but we did. And we get a lot of our own superstitions, like knock on wood, things like that we do without thinking or say without thinking, little euphemisms and cliches that we say like that. Now, the history, a stick that is used for reaching, pointing, drawing in the dirt, and directing other people. Christ drew in the dirt with his finger, right? And he manifested bread and fish with what? With his hands. He manifested that to us seemingly out of thin air, miraculously, with his hands. Rods and staffs are all an extension of that. And so we're going to look at that too. History, is it possible used by prehistoric people? It is mentioned that rods as well as rings were found with Red Lady of Paviland in Britain. Oh wow, that's an interesting name. That'd probably be interesting to look into. It is mentioned by the author in Gower, A Guide to Ancient and Historic Monuments on the Gower Peninsula, that these might have been wands and are depicted as such as a reconstruction drawing of the burial of the Red Lady. Ancient Egyptian, okay, a patrapaic wand carved from a hippopotamus tusk. Wow, that is crazy radical. Look at that. Imagine what that would take to etch that into such a tiny. That's crazy. I mean, you have to appreciate their artistry. Not everything that is Egyptian is inherently pagan. Remember, Egyptian is a culture. That's not their religion. The religions that sprung out of Egypt, you do have Babylonianism, but there were a lot of original Jews there, allegedly, and Israelites. Now, how did God's chosen people go from being Israelites to becoming Jews somehow in the Bible? Well, again, you have culture, you have religion, then you have these tribes within the cultures, so it can get pretty deep. But a lot of these things come from the same places. Just like Sumerian culture, a lot of things come from there as well. And the stories that they have are much the same as the flood. And gods ruling over the earth, like the Greek gods, the Greek pantheons. Those are obviously the same stories being told from two different cultural perspectives that probably happened at, around the same time period. But they sell Greek mythology as being false when mythology is just another word for history. So, it's good to study the etymology of these words as well. Okay, so we see that during the Middle Kingdom of Egypt, they were used during birth ceremonies. Okay, that's crazy. They were split down the middle, producing two wands. That's neat. Due to the curved nature of the hippopotamus tusk, these wands were curved with one pointed end, the point of the tusk, and one blunt end, which is interesting because we looked at the fact that some Egyptians were vegetarians by demographic. They were poor, and some Egyptians were elitists, and they were vegetarians. It's funny, a lot of people won't understand this, but that's another thing that I'm getting to see, is that a lot of things are divided by what people eat. Vegetarians and non-vegetarian carnivores or herbivores, whatever you want to call people, it seems to be a real dividing factor in the religions and the way they practiced or walked out their spirituality. It was considered that people who abstained were of a higher spiritual level. And by that, I don't mean in their own eyes, I mean in the eyes of other people. Again, narcissism is not a holy attribute. That is not an attribute of the true God. So when reading scripture, when the narcissistic feeling starts to come out, you should ask yourself, is that really the spirit of the true God? And I just think that's important. Thank you for being here. If you are here, if you're staying, we're getting there. We're getting somewhere with all of this. So we see that things definitely evolved as well. You don't see people today with curved wands. In Harry Potter and modern pop culture, the wands were not curved like that. It looks like they were directly, it says the earliest wands used in Egypt were undecorated, but from around 1850 BC. That's pretty old. They were usually provided with decorations, in which we saw carry knives to ward off, most of whom carry knives to ward off evil forces. Okay, so decorations that were related to the sun religion or particular aspects of it inscribed on the convex upper side, most of whom carry knives to ward off evil forces. Now that's interesting that they still carry knives to ward off these evil forces, but that they have wands. So which is it, right? And this is another thing about bringing Christ to people is showing them you don't need these things. You don't need all these outer entrapments to be spiritual, to have these spiritual awakenings, to talk to the one who made you, right? However, at the same time, we see Noah had a staff. Moses had a staff. It was practical for him to have one in walking, just in walking. But I believe there's something to be said for the gemstones and the way that they interact with something in the environment, with the air, because I do believe that this is some type of electric or a plasma universe. And that's very evident in a lot of ways. I wonder myself why people don't question things a little bit more when it comes to certain things. People are the conductors, right? We are conductors because we are a third water. And I don't know how many times I've dropped electric things in the water and they've not gotten ruined. You might have to let them dry out, but they're not ruined. So there's a lot of misunderstanding or just non-understanding of how our environment works. But I do believe that these staves, some of them had gemstones on the ends of them. Hi, Denise. I'm subbed to a little channel, a guy who plays the, oh gosh, what is the horn from the Bible? The Jewish horn. Oh, fiddlesticks. Why can't I think of the name of it? And I love it. Like, I think they sound beautiful. There's a guy, he goes outside, and he lives somewhere really flat. I want to say, like, Oklahoma, maybe Texas. But he goes outside, and he blows this thing. And you see in the one video that lightning just starts to, like, gravitate towards where he's at, and it almost begins to look like a vortex above him. As he's blowing this, it's like creating some type of thunderstorm or reaction in his physical environment, right? No, not a harp. He blows it. It's like it's a horn from an animal, but it's called something else. It's a Jewish thing. Oh gosh. The rabbis blow them. Oh my gosh, why can't I think of the name? Anyways, he goes outside and does that, and I'll have to share the video. I've shared it a few times over the years, but it really made me look at things a lot differently. Like this short 2-minute video, I'm like, holy cow, look at what's happening there. And is that what happened when, like, Moses would go to the top of the mountains and quote unquote talk to God? Shofar, yes. Thank you. I'm sorry. I'm not up to par lately. I'm a little stressed out, so these videos are a way to de-stress and to try and feel like I'm serving and just conveying what I'm seeing or able to see, just trying to be a part of the body of Christ, trying to contribute something. And hopefully some of this is little gemstones for somebody, and it makes something click and they can see, I'm trying to show the good in these things and take out the superstition. The counterfeit kingdom is just illusion. It's illusory. It's not real. It's just borrowing from the kingdom of God and calling it something else. That's all any of it is. And it's frustrating to someone like me who sees these things. The apostles, they cast lots. What does that mean? They drew sticks to see who would be the next apostle. That's kind of superstitious, but they felt like they couldn't decide, and they didn't know what God's will was because they themselves couldn't decide. So do you see how that can work against you sometimes? Trying to discover God's will and seeking it out, it can elude you simply because you can't fathom what it is with your human brain at that moment. So these other things were set up to, because of this disconnect here on earth, you establish other things like the justice system, right? But most of it is just illusory. It's just temporary. And you should not be afraid of witchcraft and whatnot. Those things cannot work against you unless your faith is weak or unless you allow them to. and sometimes unless God allows them to, because the Most High thinks you have a lesson to learn, and that is what any loving parent does for their child. Okay, so moving on. Now, the I'll probably say this wrong, so correct me. Zoroastrian, and words are my thing, but some of these ancient words, like they throw me the ancient groups of people and whatnot, like Chaldean or Chaldean. I'm pretty sure I messed up and I corrected somebody else the other day about that, and I was the one who was wrong about that. Zoroastrian magi is a bundle of twigs that was used during religious ceremonies. And they are said to be a sect, or some of them were said to be Christian. So again, separating the culture from the faith or religion can be muddy waters, right? And it's almost like genealogy. Everybody at some point was related. So at this point, it's hard to sometimes determine where we set in history, because we're at such a point now. We're just flooded with information, much like that verse in Daniel says. I actually really love this painting too. As somebody who studied art history and as an artist, who used to be an artist, I understand the symbology of things, and they don't scare me, and I'm not afraid of them, and I don't immediately look at things and say good or bad, pagan or whatever. I say, what can I learn from this? And what symbology am I seeing here? And yes, there is some symbology of the sun and of birth and of nurturing and nature, and you have all these things, and it's actually Circe with her magical wand, and Circe offering the cup to Ulysses, a 1891 painting by John William Waterhouse. I actually think it's beautiful, and again, if you can visualize these old stories as you're reading them, it really helps you relate to the character better, the character or person, individual in the story. But it also maybe helps you empathize with your fellow man and say, okay, I kind of see where they're coming from with this. I can see why they went astray here. Or, oh my gosh, I've went astray here. I need to get back on the right track. These are muddy waters, and the lines in the sand are not always clear, because the counterfeit kingdom is just an illusion. It's not even real. So you don't even always see it. You're kind of like, what is it? The concept of magic wands was used by the ancient Greek writer Homer in his epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey. In all cases, Homer used the word rabidos, which means rod, and implies something that is thicker than the modern conception of wand. And again, you also have, in the negative aspect, the old grandparents who would say, go out in the yard and pick a switch, which was a branch from a tree, which is basically what a wand is. You pick a series of branches and braid them together, or pick one branch, or you pick a hardy branch, and that is your staff or wand of choice. But back in those days, your grandma would tell you, go pick a switch. You'd pick one off the tree, and you'd pick one that was not still green and that would break easily, because you knew that was going to be used on your bottom. That's where the verse, spare the rod, spoil the child, comes from. And that's actually true. And I don't mean physically abusing your child. I mean disciplining them when they're wrong. And that's where the verse comes from. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me, right? So rods and staffs, wands, they're all, in essence, at the root of the history of the etymology. They're the same things. Now here we have the mystical and religious usage. Wands are used in the Enochian magic of John Dee. Now here's where we get into the counterfeit kingdom being born in the modern era. Babylonianism, we know, is steeped in the quote-unquote occult, which just means hidden. They hide the things that they do. Why are they hiding them? Well, your guess is as good as mine, but I would say because they're wicked, some of them. Not all things that are hidden are wicked, but some things are. But God is also hidden in this world to some people. They can't see him. We can't see God, but we see the effects of God around us. Sorry, I had to have a little nectar of the gods there, a little orange juice. Ones are used in the Enochian magic of John Dee, and we know that John Dee was allegedly talking to angels. They created their own alphabet, which could be used on, or called sigils, right? An alphabet is also sigils, and that's when words become spells, and Christ told us words have the power of death or life. These are all the same lessons being taught over or throughout different cultures, okay? But here is where, for a really strong example of going into the counterfeit kingdom emerges. John Dee allegedly talked to angels, allegedly got an alphabet from them. Then things got weird because he started getting knowledge that humans weren't supposed to have. And all of a sudden, the angels are suggesting to him and his counterpart that they should swap wives. That polygamous idea always comes out. Adulterous actions, acts that are bad for your body, your temple, always come out. Denise, interesting idea. I'd never considered that rod might not be a switch, but energy or knowledge or discipline, right? Like, it's metaphor. It doesn't necessarily mean literal physical, and that's the problem with a lot of people teaching the Bible today, is they don't even understand what a parable or a metaphor is, and so they're teaching all of these lessons as to be literal lessons, and you see these things manifesting around you right now, and they're funny. It's like a mocking of the Gnostic theology of, well, where Christ says, I'll just turn her into a man. He was not serious. He didn't mean he was going to literally turn Mary into a man. He was being facetious to Peter and showing Peter how ridiculous he was being to hold the fact that she was a woman against her, that she didn't have knowledge or wisdom to share with the group. It wasn't literal. But you're seeing people who don't understand these spiritual concepts act these things out, and it's a horror, honestly. And you should be empathizing with your fellow man and saying, heavens, let me help you understand what this means. Let me help you to get through the day. But now people like me who actually see these things and call them out and say this is what's happening, well, for some reason I am mentally defunct, or I am to be blackballed, or I am some type of leper in my community, not because I had transgressed or sinned or any of those things, but because I had repented of those things. And again, you have this backwards thinking. And I'm not mad, I'm not angry, I'm just to the point where I'm tired, right? I'm just tired. And I do videos like this to show you how it can be funny, seeing these things play out and manifest in present day or in your reality in front of you in real time, right? Just like the one verse of the Bible says, they will be, in the end times, men will be lovers of themselves and incontinent. And today our definition of incontinent is unable to, hold your bladder or your, your waist in, or properly control that. And you see what? You see poopy emojis everywhere. That's not actually what that verse means. But you are seeing these things manifest all the same, in strange ways, because I think someone is trying to talk to us, and we have all this interference, and we have a lot of noise happening. And people like me who do understand words and who are able to, and again, I don't know better than teachers of 1,000 years ago or anything like that. The problem is that people aren't even understanding the lessons from the teachers of 1,000 years ago. That's the problem. That's where the disconnect is coming in. And when you try and correct someone who is prideful and says, this is the way I've taught it for years, this is what it means, or someone who is purposely misteaching it to lead the flock astray, that's a hard position to take. And so sometimes you end up standing alone, but all the same, these things are important and we need to know where they come from. Ones are used in the magic, Enochian magic of John Dee. So I told you about him. But all these things have one thing in common: Hellenistic views, some Luciferian cults, many of the secret societies. I don't know about all of them, but many of them promote promiscuity and sex magic, not understanding that you are blessed even more when you abstain and you don't participate in things like that. So again, you have this counterfeit kingdom doing the exact opposite and teaching the exact opposite of what they should be teaching. And they're teaching it to corrupt mankind. Like, there is a serious anti-human agenda here. And I actually heard, who's that girl? Brett Cooper, comment section. I love her show. She's a lovely young lady, and I think she deserves the success she has gotten. Interesting insight about the emoji everywhere and in our reality in our city streets. Right. I did a video on that a while back, directly, relating that verse to that, that strange, like, why is it acceptable for people to have pillows of poopy? My son first showed me that years ago. He's like, Mom, do you know what this is? And I said, it looks like chocolate ice cream. I thought it was soft serve ice cream. He's like, nope, it's this. And I was like, seriously? He's like, yeah. And he was like, and somebody else told me, I'll show you. And they said, type it out, semicolon, POOP, semicolon. And when you type like that, you get the emoji. That's the code for emoji to pop up there. So, yeah. Anyways, moving on. Sorry about that. In all of these things, though, you see that the corruption begins to take place with them suggesting that some type of polygamous or promiscuous behavior is quote-unquote okay. And by them, I mean the alleged fallen angels that they're communicating with, the alleged angels they're communicating with, i.e. demons, whatever way you want to slice that, aliens, whatever you call them, okay? This is why Stephen Greer's meditation program is dangerous. He's telling people to invite these beings. I'd like to know how many people participated in that between the year of like 2015 and 2018. How many people are were doing that and calling these things to them and inviting them into their home. It's not enough we do the Santa ritual. It's not enough we leave out cookies for some being that it's going to sneak in. We're going to trust it to sneak in while we're sleeping. Like, the stuff that we teach is just a little bit weird. Now, if you tell the story about the original St. Nicholas, that's cool, right? But somewhere along the line, that got twisted up with all this other stuff. Anyways, I'm doing this to take the superstition out of it and to say, this is where this comes from. If you want to keep doing it, that's up to you. But intent also matters. Intent is very important. Now, you could have a man like Moses with a staff who understands that gemstones interact with the weather. I'm going to go, he gets so frustrated with the Israelites. Like, I'm convinced. He's like, he does a face palm and he says, I'm going to go up to the top of this mountain. Y'all stay here. Don't move. Don't touch anything. Stay here. I'm going to go up here. You stay here. And just don't die while I'm away. Don't cause anything to go wrong. So he goes to the top of the mountain to be alone and to obviously commune with God because he can't hear him with this flock that he's trying to lead. And he has this staff, right? And it probably has gemstones, and Aaron's vest had gemstones. And these different gemstones have different frequency. That's the whole point of gemstones. Each gemstone is somewhere on the rainbow, on the spectrum of light, on the frequency. They all have a different wavelength or a different frequency. That's why some of them actually help you to talk to the heavenly realms, allegedly. So I don't mind having a couple of them around. If they help me hear God better with all the noise down here, I'm good with it. But I don't think that that power of God, that God himself resides in them. Do you know what I mean? Like intent matters. There is a difference. And we can't be pointing at everyone we see walking down the street saying witchcraft, or pointing at everybody and saying this is your sin and this is your sin and this is your sin. We have to first clear up our own vision. Christ said to take the beam out of thy own eye. And then if you think you can help your brother, help him. Because once you take it out of your own eye, you're going to realize, man, that hurt. I should be more sensitive when I'm delivering the message to other people, maybe. When I'm trying to correct my brother, when I'm trying to raise up my child. Maybe I should have a little more tact and a little more compassion when dealing with certain topics. We can't be pointing at everybody saying witch. What if somebody's relative was burned as a witch? What if all she did for a living was make tea to fulfill her family, somehow feed her family, but somebody in town was jealous of that? Ezekiel explicitly mentions beryl stones in his vision of Christ. Right, right. And I'm convinced that gemstones were a part of the first computers. Like that's how things are made in heaven, is of gemstones. Enoch tells us this. The Emerald City and the Wizard of Oz, like I said, every idea, every concept that we get down here is from above. Every story is the biblical story. It's in The Little Mermaid. It's in Pinocchio. They want to point out everything evil and wicked to you. Are those really the Christian channels you want to be watching and donating to and helping to make larger? And no, I don't say that out of jealousy. My channel will never be very big. And it's because I speak explicitly on what people put inside of their temples. That is one main thing that the system comes after you for, is talking about eating. And again, I don't say that out of judgment either. Beam, light and not wooden beam. I've been wondering about that a lot lately. I don't think it matters in context as far as that goes. Like, take the beam from your own eye. All it means is that it's going to hurt. Like, you can't see, you're blinded, right? When you're sinning or you're lost into something, you're blind. So it takes somebody else who's already been there to show you, like, hey, I messed with this already, and you might want to go the other way. That's not a good path to take, right? But it has to be done with love and care. There are too many out there today, like the street preachers. You're gonna burn in hell. You can't bring people to God that way, through fear. Now, granted, God brought me to God through fear, but that was like the fear of God that was put in me. It wasn't even like, and the Bible explicitly condemns street preaching. Explicitly. These people aren't reading the books they propagate. And they propagate a very specific version of that, I believe, for a very specific reason. And that's because they know that copy of it is condemned. We are told not to be removing the books and not to be adding the books. Once it was done, it was done. And we're supposed to trust that God somehow. That's why the Gnostic Gospels, I read them for information, but I don't take those people's perspective as fact, right? Because perspective deviates and varies between people. Right, Denise. But light beam is very what's the word I'm looking, insightful, because I do believe everything holds a frequency. Now, does that mean everything holds life if an inanimate object has frequency? Well, I told you I believe the gemstones are the petrified remains of the giant ones. Have you tried talking to God in Temple OS yet? Me personally, I have not. It kind of creeps me out. It kind of creeps me out, but I was seeing those same things that Terry was seeing, and I was talking about China and all these things way back in 2017, 2018 without any of that. And that's what I'm trying to show people. You don't have to have a magic wand. You don't have to have a computer. You don't have to have any of these things to talk to God. Does it sometimes make it easier, or let's not say easier, God will talk to you and reach you wherever you are. But at that point, you got to try and mature in your spirituality, right? You have to know that certain things are not good for you. Just like I have to, every week I try to use my device a couple hours less than the week before. And so far I've been doing it. But I wonder where I'll get to the point where it's like 0, right? Though that's not going to happen if I keep living the way that I'm living. But you see the circle, the snake eating its own tail, how it can turn into that. God can talk to us, and he will come to us wherever we are in our life, if he knows it's our time to listen, if he knows we're receptive to the message, and our free will is going to accept it at that point. But, it's up to us to not remain living there. Makes it easier, like the high priest in the tabernacle, might help you feel less tired. I never thought of it that way, but again, my aim is to try and pull away from technology. And I'm not as smart as you, so I don't know that I would even use that properly. Um, yeah, I'd probably need like a guide just to operate it. So that's all I'm going to say on that notion. Coding is not my thing. Like, I was never good at coding. Like, we learned it, they started exposing us to it at like 6th grade level, and it was old school, like DOS. And I hated it. Like, I was just like, can I get out of here? This is boring. I like the end result. I like the little games and the commands, just like the POOP actually brings up the emoji, like little things like that. But to code a system, I'm not wise. I'm not smart enough for that. I think that Satan always appears in the woods. I was thinking about that. God asked people to build temples. Here's the thing about that. Okay. How do I explain this? So your body is the temple, number one. Your body is the first temple of the Holy Spirit. It is the temple, okay? But again, everything in the Bible has like 3 different iterations. So first, your body is the temple. And then, yes, mankind goes out and builds temples. I'm going to get to the reason for that you just touched on there about invitation and stuff. Hold that thought. I can't look at my phone because I'll lose the thought I'm trying to convey. So your body is the first temple. Then we go out and we build temples because number 1, we copy God. Number 2, we have to have a place to gather our little temples together. So we build a physical temple to gather all our little temples in together, right? And it's the physical representation of the body of Christ. The body, all its parts and members are gathered together in one big temple of Christ. It is a, if you stand above it and look at it, it is the physical representation, manifestation. It is the symbology of the body of Christ is what the temples are. Now, to touch on what you said about the woods, that's kind of key. Satan does not always appear in the woods. You have to remember that we had people who were plagued by demons in the desert as well. When they went out in isolation in the desert, even, Babylon, Egypt, all those places were in the desert. But what does it mean? The desert and the wilderness, they mean the same thing metaphorically. They're 2 different places, right? They're 2 different locations. But metaphorically, they mean the same thing. To go out and be alone and face your demons head on by yourself. What demon was Christ facing? Well, he was facing Satan, or at least his Satan. What do I mean by that? I think we each have a Satan that operates against us, a deceiver, right? And if you look in the mirror, you'll see it. It is the worst part of yourself. So when you go out into the wilderness or you go out into the desert, what that means is that you are going somewhere in isolation to be secluded, to be with God, and to stand firm against your demons, your Satan. All right. That's the symbolic representation. Now, to get to what you're talking about of Satan actually showing up in the wilderness and in the desert. Of course, he's going to show up there because that's where you're alone, number 1. Number 2, I've been thinking about this in regards to how everybody's doing this cowboy camping. And I would recommend in this time that we're living in, don't do that. Don't do the cowboy camping thing. I love it. I always thought it was fun to sleep outside. But don't do it right now. Because right now, like I told you, we're in a different time. Certain agreements are no longer between man and between these beings, I guess. I think that was a real thing with our president, and I did a whole video on that too. When you have a tent, when it talks about a tent in the Bible, and I talked about this not too long ago, you have a door, right? Other beings have to ask for permission to enter then. They can't just harass you or torment you. The story of the 3 little pigs tells us this, right? And this is the meat of my ministry. This is, I'm good at showing you these stories and what they actually mean. We are shown this lesson in the 3 little pigs, that it is important to have a strong foundation physically and spiritually. The big bad wolf, these wolves, these deceivers cannot get in unless you grant them permission. I've talked about this ad nauseum. And when they ask you if they can come in, they're not just meaning your house or the temple around you, your tent. They mean your physical body. Now, when you are out and about and you are camping and doing these things at summertime, right now, in this time that we're living in, your tent offers you protection because that is showing that nothing else is invited around you in your space. In that space, nothing can enter that because that is your space. Okay? Some people believe in burning sage. Some people believe in putting ashes around you. Some people believe in circles of salt. I'm not going to say yay or nay for those things. We have gone over them. We've even gone over the red brick from the Three Little Pigs. I think all you need is God, but I don't think those things hurt, especially because we all have moments of fear where your faith might slip and your armor might slip, or you might slip into a small sin, and then you have a hole in your armor, and you are weak, and you're weakened, right? A tent or a building will offer you protection, especially in these times. Why do you think these beings are trying to force people into homelessness? Why do you think they're degrading the homeless community so much? Let me tell you something. If you didn't notice, Christ himself was homeless, okay? And that's a big problem in the Catholic Church is materialism. I know this is being raised in that church. That's a big problem. We have some great saints who have come out of that church, but only because probably they've seen the excess and said, okay, I need to balance this out here, and I need to deny myself everything so that God's church still stands strong. This is what a tent offers you, is that type of protection, and other beings know they're not invited in your space. So temple, you have the temple within, which is where you house God, the Holy Spirit. The temple without, which would be the actual church building where all the little temples gather, right? And then and this is why the third temple with the Jewish people, they keep waiting and waiting and waiting. The temple that Christ spoke of that would be rebuilt in 3 days was his body. And my grandma used to say this ad nauseum all the time. Patience is a virtue. Patience is a virtue. What are you, man or mouse? Are you man or mouse? And then your body is a temple. Treat it like the temple that it is all the time. Thank you, Lord, for Aunt Grace. She was a blessing in my life. She said those things all the time. And they're true. Catholic theology and doctrine is really sound, and this is another thing people are missing when all they have is the KJV. You're not seeing the ecclesiastical history, and ecclesiastical just means church. Back then there was one church. That's why you only have one ecclesiastical history. Ecclesiastical means church, okay? And I also want to do a study into church and temple, because it seems like those words are now used interchangeably, but they don't mean the same thing. And I don't think the bride of Christ, like a lot of people, I don't think that's the same. I think these are all different concepts. I don't think they all mean the same thing. Okay, so it is funny seeing these things physically manifest, and it ends up becoming like a mockery of that said faith or system or belief system. Please consider giving the video a thumbs up if you understand the verbiage that I use. I did get off track there. I apologize. But when people bring things up, I like to address them. I think that's the fair and balanced thing to do. Now you have to understand this too. The Key of Solomon is a grimoire. What is a grimoire? Well, it's a personal diary or journal. Most people have these today. Not understanding back then a grimoire was allegedly a personal spell book. But you can have anything in a grimoire. You can have diary entries. You can have recipes, family recipes that you pass down. And yes, certain prayers that you might write down that are personal prayers. The counterfeit of that is a grimoire, a witch's book, right? And honestly, it sounds a lot like the Bible because it is a counterfeit. Everything is a copy. Why do you think there's a black mass? Because it is the counterfeit or the inverted version of the true mass. So that should tell people something. And the mass that they're copying is the Catholic mass. So if the devil is copying that or mocking it or making fun of it or corrupting it and perverting it, why do you think he's doing that? Because that started out as the first church. The Key of Solomon became popular among occultists for hundreds of years, and I actually have some of that. Key of Solomon by Samuel Mathers, one of the co-founders of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which made the text of the Key of Solomon available. You see, so you have these people who start out as godly people, but they lose ground because they start making themselves into something they're not, right? Into these all-powerful beings. There's a balance to be had. Yes, we have power. Yes, there is power in our words. Yes, there is even power in our hands and in the extensions of our fingers and hands. But that comes at a great responsibility. Now, history of, let's see. I want to see if they, because in as I was saying earlier, in the book of Thomas, they make reference to Christ pointing. And you see this with witches in history. They would just point. They wouldn't even need a wand. They would just say, hocus pocus or whatever and point at somebody. So is that why we are all told today not to point? Does it have some type of occult root, or were children displaying some otherworldly, appearing to be seemingly otherworldly power? Because again, we started out as quite different beings than we are today. The origin of pointing, evidence for the touch hypothesis. That's different. Pointing gestures play a foundational role in human language. Where does pointing originate from? Pointing gestures are not produced as arrows. Rather, they are produced in such a way that it looks to the participant as though the tip of her finger is making contact with the object she is pointing at, as though she is touching that object. Evidence for the touch hypothesis. And look, isn't it interesting that the government is always wrapped up in metaphysical studies of our brain and its limitations or lack thereof, much like we see in the show Stranger Things. And if you don't watch that show, I'm not telling you if you should or not. MK Ultra, Montauk, all of that whole urban legend surrounding all of that. And it's actually fact. I mean, a lot of it is fact. But it's interesting that our government is always, every time we do a video like this or research live, if it's something faith-based or what they call metaphysical, because again, counterfeit kingdom, and we kind of run Satan's kingdom here ourselves. We each have the capacity to be a Satan, a deceiver. So we are wrapped up in this ourselves, in that we each have that within us, right? We each have that capability of being that way. Narcissistic and hateful and deceptive, right? But it's interesting that the government is always wrapped up in these things. Let's go to the top. So this is the National Library of Medicine, the National Institute of Health, National Center for Biotechnology Information. And again, this is where it gets weird, because people who are tied up in like the study of dreams, for example, like we saw with that one man, they're always tied up in genetics. Like, what do dreams have to do? Like those are two you can have two fields that were so different, in my opinion. Like, those are way different. So that just blows my mind. So these are just things to think about. And I know we're off track from wands, but again, where did the wand originate? Well, it originated from a wand being something that you get as like a rite of passage. If you know anything about like Harry Potter or the Sword and Stone, like older stories like that, it's like a rite of passage, right? But before that, you're using your finger, much like Christ wrote in the sand with his finger instead of using a stick or a pencil. And he did not make it permanent. I found that very interesting. We don't find anything written by him, but we find everything written about him. That should tell you something. It's not always what you think of yourself that matters. Historically speaking, it will be how other people perceive you, but it is also what God thinks of you. And the main point of all of this is love, to love each other, and show each other the grace that God gives us as far as forgiveness goes. But anyway, it's good to find why certain things are done today, why they are still doing them or not doing them, and why they're studying this. Now, this is from July 2019, so this is fairly recent. The origin of pointing, evidence for the touch hypothesis. What is the touch hypothesis? Pointing gestures are produced and interpreted as though they originate in touch. Pointing gestures, but up to now we have not known where these gestures come from. Here we investigate the hypothesis that pointing originates in touch. And you can see that, right? Like if you point to something, or those illusion pictures people take, right? It shows them holding the sun or the moon. Well, you know they're not actually holding the sun or the moon, but it looks like that. That's what it looks like, right? Well, when you point at something, you're saying, I want that, or you're cursing that thing or that person, right? That's why I think we were told not to point and especially to speak as we're pointing, because we could literally damn or bless somebody else if God allowed. And again, I'm not saying these things will actually happen. That's up to you to decide and to interpret and to, do further research into, or go to God in prayer about and say, what is the difference in a spell and in a psalm? And how do I know the difference? Well, the difference is in intent. It is in your heart. And this is why Christ told us in the Sermon on the Mount, love above all things. What does that mean? Love covers an abundance of sin. What does that mean? That means to do everything from a place of love, whether it be love for God, love for your neighbor, love for your family, love for your country, and yes, love for yourself, but love, not narcissism. There's a difference there. So we can see where that comes from, the touch hypothesis. So I get that. Why is pointing disrespectful? Okay, so in many cultures, including ours, and this is science focus, pointing at other people is considered rude because it's associated with blame allocation. I like the word choice there, because like I said, you could, back in the day, you would point at somebody and you would say, I cursed you, or hocus pocus, blah, 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 blah. These things, are from, my generation's, I guess you would say, urban legends and lore and stories, family generational stories and whatnot. We all have different ones now because, they've made the generation gap like pretty big between people. Also, by pointing at someone, you automatically and without their consent make them an object of scrutiny. So that's interesting. And there was a lot of that going on at the witch trials. And now also people will say that don't point fingers, don't play the blame game, which I'm big on saying. Take accountability for you. And yes, we are supposed to call out evil. I agree with that if you see it happening. Again, we're not supposed to look for it explicitly. Not everybody's called to do that. There are some people who are. But that's interesting. Without their consent, you make them an object of scrutiny. Well, then you can't never speak to anyone either, because you're speaking to them without their consent sometimes. Like if you see them out and about. I don't know. This gets really, like I said, you can't get too focused on the consent thing. While it does matter and it is important, you can't let it micromanage your life. Just like you can't do with anything, too much of anything. We need moderation in all of these things. What is the psychology behind pointing? It's a universal human impulse, perhaps like yawning or laughing. I find that weird because I don't yawn much anymore, but I find that people I talk to yawn a lot, and I find that the only time I ever really did yawn was when I was being deceptive, either to myself or somebody else. And that's a strange realization to make. Like, even when I'm tired, I really don't yawn that much. Pay attention next time you say something to somebody, or somebody just comes in the room, or they just arrive in the house and you talk, how was your day? And the first thing they do is yawn. That's a subconscious behavior, and it's a tell. It's not a genuine yawn. It's not done because of tiredness. So it's not a universal human impulse. But note when that was written, February 2018, and we've talked about this. There was this big change online, especially in about 2018, where a lot of information was flipped and or eliminated. Thanks for being here, guys. So we're talking about now how the magic wonder staff is an extension of the finger and or hand. So in the Washington Post from 2016, pointing is rude, right? For everything else, Ms. Manners recommends, well, the pointing index finger, such as a name, are always preferred. Okay, well, I mean, I get it, but I want to know where it came from. Okay, this will be interesting. In Cambodia and Malaysia, pointing with your index finger is considered completely rude. People either try pointing with two fingers, with their thumbs, or with the whole hand. I don't know if I'd believe that, because that's very recent, and I don't know. Because you could go to like Cambodia or Malaysia as an American person and maybe do this, and maybe it means you're flipping them off. Just like the peace sign doesn't mean peace in Britain, it means F off. I didn't even know that until like a couple of years ago. What are the 3 types of pointing? Pointing finishes. These include, what does that mean? What's a pointing finish? On a masonry wall. That's interesting that it has to do with masonry. Next, what culture does not like pointing? Malaysia. It's rude to point. An index finger point is always rude in Malaysia. Thumbs up can mean good. That's cool. Pointing at people is seen as rude. Yeah. I want to know where it came from, though. Come on now. Evidence for the touch hypothesis, which we went through. Development in natural history. Other animals don't point spontaneously. Exactly. Finger pointing. The manicle's origin to mark private moments of joy, curiosity. I don't know if this is, it looks kind of related. The manicule's origins? What's a manicule? Is that what it means? Ah, there's some Latin for us. Hold on. From 1501. Used to mark for times of joy, curiosity, outrage, and mortgage books and manuscripts. Oh, so they're talking about the actual, like what we call an emoji today. They're telling you where this comes from. But odds are you'll encounter them all the time. Yeah, they are in little. I never noticed that. I didn't know they had a name or anything. Okay, crazy. Next. So in there, they're used as an emoji. It's used to point out something of interest or important worth noting. The secret word of pointing. Advice, of course. There we go. Let's trust Vice to get it all together and pull it all together into one place for us. Although I don't appreciate their perspective on everything. Let's take a look. Interviewed George Bush pressing about the war in Afghanistan. Near the end, Bush replied, the free world has to make a choice. Do we cower in the face of terror or do we lead? When he said free world, he pointed to his own chest. Okay, for Kenzie Cooperrider, a professor of cognitive science at University of California in San Diego, this gesture was easy to understand, but simultaneously rich with meaning. It was really interesting conceptual move where he equated his own body with the abstract entity of the free world. Well, each body is its own world, isn't it? The moment helped launch Cooperrider's interest in pointing, the ubiquitous act that we all take part in, perhaps daily without thinking too much. Yet pointing is a gesture, and other linguists, anthropologists, and psychologists have found to be wrapped up with culture, cognition, and language. Moving on, let's see what else they have to say. 15 different ways to view pointing, including as a building block of language. A gesture that raises philosophical questions, a recurring motif in art, and you'll see this a lot. They're pointing up all the time in a lot of old paintings. They're pointing up to the sky. That's interesting. You'll also see UFOs. That doesn't interest me so much because Ezekiel talks about that. We know that there's something going on up there. But the fact that they're all pointing, and they're all different people. It's like St. John the Baptist, and please let this not be some POR. Okay, it's a car. Good grief, ads. I apologize. You're not going to let me read this, are you? I'm sorry, that stinks. I wanted to see the rest of that. Okay. Blah, blah, blah. It's frequent. The Last Supper. Yeah, there you have the Last Supper to John the Baptist to a woman in the landscape, which is sometimes called the pointing lady. Visual representations of pointing are not only common in art, but you also have the little manicules, which are those little pointing guys. The first ever emoji, it looks like, the manicule. Okay, so it says here, today the emoji of an index finger sticking up in the air is a symbol for a new thought or insight or gesturing to something for emphasis, right? Pointing is all around us, which is true. And it's one of the first things a kid does, and that's true too. Babies at things that they want to touch, and it's almost our first lesson when we're told, don't point, don't point. So pointing is closely related to words like this, that, here, these, those, which makes sense. Look at this one. Some are very old. And I want to see if I can back up what I said earlier just to show you. Like Bush pointing at himself as in the free world, right? We can point through physical objects like walls. We can point to things that don't exist. We can point to a reference or passage of time. Even infants can point. We know this. Look there. It's not polite to point. We know that. One is called the horned hand, used when you're pointing to someone in the direction their destination is in, but not the exact route to get there. So they really like analyze every single version of the point. It's from no. Okay, I want to see. So I'll just ask the question. There we go. Cult world. They'll tell us for sure. Of course they will. And again, I want you to be aware of things that happen around you every single day, or maybe things that you do that you should change, or be more mindful in the words that you use. If you're pointing, if you're using words to degrade your own self, if you're talking poorly or down about yourself. Remember, balance is key. We're going to talk about the law of resistance as well and how that comes into play. Pointing is others with a curse or a hex directed at them by pointing a finger, a bone, which some wands are made of bones. Again, I'm not pushing that. I'm bringing the information to you so you know that these things are going on around you, not superstition, but to be aware and to remove that fear so that you can live your life, right? And your faith is above and higher than all these things, that you don't need any outward thing, that humans by habit and by nature establish rituals to act out our faith, regardless of what faith that may be. So if somebody's faith is different than you, it might be a little scary at first because you don't know about it, right? You don't know what's going on with it. But the more you know about it, the more educated you are, the less fear that you have about it because you understand the reasons for them doing it, even if you don't agree with them, right? It kind of comes into the area of, I'm not telling you do without will. That's not what I'm saying. I think we all need guidelines and rules to have a basic society to live here together. That's not what I mean. They're basic things we should know better than to go out and do, like stealing from your neighbor, right? We should know not to do that. But I'm talking about education for the fact of, knowing it's out there, not being accepting of it or agreeing of it, but, being like, all right, that's nothing to fear. I don't need to be afraid of that. I have God. I have a relationship with the one who made me, the God of my understanding thus far in my walk. Hello, nice to see you. So pointing is in magic and sorcery. North American Indian tribes have legends of killing of animals by pointing. Pointing may have to be done repeatedly during a certain period of time before the curse takes effect. That's kind of creepy. I don't know, like that's kind of creepy. And a gun, when you point a gun, And it's funny how people say when they put a camera on you and they say, I'm shooting, I'm rolling, or a camera shot, right? How we interweave all these different words that don't mean the same things. That's why I tell you, when they tell you certain stories in the media, does it actually mean what they're saying? Or again, is this just them conveying a message? Is AI on the fritz? Because I personally think AI runs news outlets at this point. I just think that's the way it is. It's just my opinion. The power of pointing is based on the belief that certain magically empowered persons can direct natural forces to affect other living things. Yeah, my grandpa used to call them Injuns, and again, they just didn't know any better. Australian Aborigines have a custom of pointing the bone or boning as punishment for wrongdoing, and we showed you just a little bit ago how bones were used in some, even in Egypt, bones of rhinoceros. In one case cited by anthropologist Ronald Rose, a man convicted of blanking two girls was executed by boning. They pointed at him to kill him. That is crazy, right, Denise? The tribal wise man hammered a point into a wire and drew it through the flames of a fire while he recited curses. The wire was then pointed at the man. The wise man did this every night for a week. The victim grew progressively weaker, took to bed, and passed away on the final night of said ritual. Let me say again, I am not promoting this, propagating this in any way, shape, or form. I'm telling you your words have powers. I'm telling you psalms are the original. Spells are the counterfeit. They're the same thing. Intention is key. Are you a person of God or a person of yourself? And the harder thing to do is usually the right thing to do. Sometimes it's hard knowing God's will, but when something is hard to do, that's usually when it's the right thing to do. Staying here has been the hardest thing I've ever done. I wanted to just leave so badly. I still do. But that shows me maybe that God is telling me I need to stay here and I need to do certain things or whatever, to continue on my walk or level up or whatever you want to call it. So we see the pointing, can be, and I want to say there's a story, and I always forget the news story. I always forget which one it is, but there's a true crime story of a woman who allegedly did something to harm her own children. And in one of the scenes, it talks about how the young girl went to a psychiatrist and for a week in an effort of therapy to express this girl's feelings, she would write her mother's name down on a piece of paper and then burn it. That was her therapy session with the counselor for the first week. She would write her mother's name down and then set fire to it. That's not good. What kind of therapist or counselor or psychologist even has like a fireplace around where you can just burn something at will like that? That's not proper therapy. That is when people who say witch doctors are probably correct in saying so. Our grandparents weren't so stupid. Much like today's youth that think we are stupid, our grandparents probably knew a lot more and did not share it with us because we were not receptive to them sharing it. We thought we knew everything, much like today's generation who thinks they know what's happening, but they truly do not. And it's sad, like I said, to go over to the Reddit pages and see the polarization between people, over 30 or 35, people over 35 and people under 35, and how like they're calling for like whole groups of people to just be eradicated. I really hope it's just AI leading these charges because it's ridiculous. Okay, pointing a finger while uttering a curse is considered to be especially malevolent. Deadly magical energy streams from the finger toward the victim. Thus, hatred and intent to harm or kill is sent into the victim. The only way to nullify a pointing curse is to prevail upon the sorcerer to lift it or to seek out another and more powerful sorcerer to make a counter spell. Stronghold, what do we know? What do we know as people who seek God? That you don't need any of that. You don't need them to nullify it. You need to ask God to break it for you. There are no magic words. And yes, there can be more powerful prayers. But honestly, I don't think it doesn't have a lot to do with the words as so much the intent behind the words at the time it's uttered. Write it out if you want to. Make it special. The more that you write it and the more that you revise it, the more quote unquote power of God it will have behind it, because you're taking care with it and with the words that you're using. But don't wish death upon your enemies. You can ask God to like remove them from the situation, but I would not ask for death, because the man who lives by the sword dies by the sword. That's just my opinion. I'm a pacifist. That's how I see things. One explanation of how pointing works is that the victim, who knows he or she is about to be pointed at, may help to bring about the curse by strongly believing in the power of the witch or the sorcerer. And that's the thing. You have to have stronger faith. Your faith has to overcome this, right? Like, number one, I don't believe it's going to work, because it's not going to work. I don't accept or receive any of that you're putting on me. If somebody tells you something nasty, if you're in an argument with somebody, you rebuke those words. And rebuke doesn't just mean saying, I rebuke you. The word rebuke means that you rebuke them through words. Somebody tells you, like, you deserve to, be ended or deleted. I do not, that's a hateful thing to say. I do not accept that or receive it. I understand that you're angry right now, and I forgive you. You remove all of its power right there by forgiving them and meaning that, right? Do you see how this all works together? How the love covers a multitude of sins, and how your words have power? There is a hierarchy, even a hierarchy of authority, and how we should behave towards these things. And we don't have to have objects, although sometimes it's comforting to have our cross. And yes, sometimes the saint's medal can actually help us, because why? Because we believe it can. And I'm not saying everything you believe in is going to be that powerful. Look, the one who made this place and made us, that will is above ours, literally and figuratively, meaning it's above us physically and it's above us spiritually. That is the final say, right? What Dad says goes, but we do have a say, we do have free will, so we need to utilize it. And when I tell you to wield that sword, I'm speaking of your tongue, and to put your free will behind that. But even when you're delivering a hard message, to try and do it with love. Because if you mess up, or if you sin, or if you lead someone astray, it's easily forgiven and blotted out, because you have that love balancing out that hate. Love overshadows anything, any error. Love overshadows it. But it has to be true love. Not love this world tells you is love. Actual love. So pointing itself is neither negative nor positive, which is true, right? It's an act. But in magic or sorcery, it's usually associated with cursing, okay? Now you could say, God bless you, as you're hugging someone, like that's even better. But careful who you hug too, because again, if your faith isn't strong, these people today are using anything they can to put you into a place of fear about these things. And so I'm trying to take the fear out of them. So we finally came back around, and I displayed my thoughts on it, that it does come from an old school superstition, old world superstition, and that there may be something associated and behind the wands and the staffs, having something to do with electric energy. That is going to be in the next video. I have a book of gemstones I would like to brush up a little bit before I get into an actual video. This video was truly research with me. I did not look up any of this prior to. That's why it's kind of raw. That's what you get here. But 'tis the month to educate yourself about things like this, to remove any and all fear, but also so you can have an arsenal of knowledge on how to rebuke these things if and or when they happen to you, especially this month. Check out Ezekiel 1, lots of gem references. Oh yes, you did remind me of that. I did, and I was doing a study on that. I have to get back to it, because when I started working and this new dog and my other dog died, like everything's been a mess. Had to get a new bike, and the new bike is not for me, so it's not going to work. I'm short. I'm a shorty, like, and I'm small. I'm not, like, I'm chubby, but I'm small. I don't even know how to explain myself. But I don't fit on a lot of things in this world, and it's kind of ridiculous when I buy clothes or I buy a bike or anything like that. So now I'm going to have to pay for this bike that doesn't even, it's just a mess. So I was glad to spend some time with you guys and try to bring some lightheartedness into topics that are actually kind of serious, you know, and things that we do every day that we don't realize are steeped in the occult. I was doing a personal study on gemstones, though, and how they check out with each month, but how that each tribe is written on its own gemstone and which tribe is on which gemstone, and how each gemstone is then correlated to a color in the rainbow, and that each color, thus each gemstone, has its own frequency. So we're going to do a whole study on that, and yeah, it's going to be difficult. People are probably going to call me all kind of names that know that I love God. They're going to call me a witch or a diviner. I've already been called all those things. Like, they don't even, it just doesn't matter to me anymore. It's what God sees in me that matters. And what matters is that beyond anything, you guys feel my love for you. Like, I love you. I love humans. I love animals. I just love this place, and I love the journey, and it's hard. It sucks sometimes. I'm having a moment now. If anyone's interested, if you'd like to check out another video that I'm going to publish this afternoon, it's going to be more of a faith-based video. I will maybe publish it on this channel, but I'll definitely put it up on the other channel. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the struggles I've been facing, and about how they're both, you know, joyful and horrible sometimes, but how they have to be, and how God suffers with us. We don't actually suffer alone. So that's what's coming. Oh, and another video. I'm going to post a video about this probably today, talking about what's going on in the sky a little bit, okay? It's going to be an intro. We're going to do a whole big thing on the eclipse, but we have to talk about a couple of things that actually relate to each other. Yes, I know it says yoga journal up there again. I'm gathering information. I'm not bowing down to any false deities. So I love you guys. Have a blessed day. If you'd like to help me with my bike debacle, that'd be awesome. If not, I get it. No worries. I just hope that someday soon we all get the courage to just start gathering, because I think we're going to have to really pay attention to the Hopi prophecy regarding technology. It's not that I don't like it. It's not that I don't appreciate it. It's not that I don't think it's cool. It's that I don't think it's for us. I just don't. Too many negative things wrapped up in it. Covenant of God. That's interesting. Okay, I love you guys. Have a blessed day. Watch for other videos to be posted, and we will talk soon. Bye, guys.